this morning have been significantly reduced. What we expect to see during the course of this morning, just to give you an idea, of course, we will see initially the formal entry of the Speaker, the Honorable Joseph Isaac, who will lead prayers. We will hear obituaries and congratulatory remarks, and then we will have the confirmation of the minutes. The minutes of the meeting of Monday 10th and Tuesday 11th February, and also that of Monday 6th April 2020. Then we will take in announcements by the Speaker of the House. Then we will have presentation of papers led by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, who will present the draft estimates of revenue and expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021. This will be followed by government notices, statement by ministers, and public business. Under that, we have government business, and we expect two motions from the Honorable Prime Minister, the Minister for Finance, who will table a motion for the approval of estimates in the amount of $942 million, 179,940 Eastern Caribbean dollars, and we will move on to the budget address, which of course is the highlight of today's activity. And later on, we will also have a resolution to authorize the Minister for Finance to borrow and guarantee by means of fluctuating overdraft a sum not exceeding $61,500,000 Eastern Caribbean dollars from the First Caribbean International Bank, the National Bank of Dominica, the Royal Bank of Canada, and or any other approved financial institution. And these monies are meant to meet central government's current overdraft requirements and to guarantee overdrafts beginning from the first day of July 2020. Then we will see a further resolution which will authorize the minister responsible for finance to borrow a sum not exceeding the amount of 125 million EC dollars from the National Bank of Dominica Limited. And these monies will be made available at an interest rate of 4%. The repayment period is 20 years. And following all of that, we will have the adjournment of the House proceedings. As you know, following that, the opposition very likely will be given until the following day, tomorrow, Wednesday, to prepare a response and return to the House to make the presentation. That is the Honorable Lennox Linton, the opposition leader, following which we have a continuing debate on the budget with MPs from both sides of the House participating. We note that this year's budget is about $78 million less than last year's budget. How do we interpret this? Is this a sign of the times that we are operating within more stringent circumstances and that government needs to be more conservative in its spending? For example, we have seen the budget amounts increase progressively over the past 12 years or so. So, for example, in 2008 to 2009, we saw a budget of just over $400 million. By 2014, it had risen to just over $550 million. In 2016, we saw a budget of over $750 million. And in 2019-2020, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit presented his largest budget ever to the Parliament, $1.2 billion. So how do we interpret this? It is significant, I think, to note that this is the first year since 2008 that we have seen a decline in the budget amount. We can assess that piece of information within the context of the various shocks to the national economy. First, we had the impact of Tropical Storm Erica, followed by the devastating impact of Hurricane Maria, and now we are in the middle of a pandemic. Clearly, we have to respond to these shocks in the economy, and of course, this is a most highly anticipated budget as it comes in the midst of a pandemic, and I do apologize for all of this activity in front of me. It's very windy on the balcony of the Parliament building. We have seen layoffs during the pandemic, we have seen salary cuts, and we know that the tourism industry has suffered the most significant setbacks. Several hotels, if not all all hotels have had to close, and several hundreds of tourism workers are out of work. This as the travel industry worldwide remains on a virtual standstill. It means that economies around the world have been hard hit, and Dominica is no exception. The collection of revenue we know has been impacted, and so there's an urgent need to identify new and creative measures to stimulate activity in the economy, to jumpstart business in previously untapped areas of endeavor, and to inspire and provide incentives for people who are willing to do so to engage in productive activity. We have already heard from Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit that the budget contains a $30 million loan facility at the Aid Bank at a very concessionary rate of 1%. We also heard the Prime Minister tease that there will be an easing of port duties on materials meant for manufacturing and agro-processing. And this is significant because these are two areas that previously we've heard calls for more activity, more incentives within those sectors as alternative routes of generating activity within the local economy. What other measures are in the budget to stimulate activity, to generate revenue? Your guess is as good as mine, but we hope to see sound recommendations to stimulate activity within the tourism sector, for example. As I said earlier, they've had serious setbacks. How are we going to get creative to get the island prepared for the new normal, for when travel resumes? And we do hope that eventually it does resume. How do we get the island prepared to accommodate what we hope will be an influx of visitors within the new realities of COVID-19. A bigger budget for destination marketing, perhaps, something to consider. Of course, as a country, we remain convinced that agriculture should be one of the main drivers of the economy, and I think that is a general consensus among the population. We saw the importance of food security during Tropical Storm Erica after Hurricane Maria, and certainly during the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of ensuring that every Dominican citizen has access to a reliable food supply. And of course, the need to increase our production capacity for export. We hear that there is high demand for Dominican produce in ground provisions, ginger, turmeric, but we are also hearing that we do not have the capacity to provide to satisfy that demand on a consistent basis. Granted, we have seen significant interventions from the Agriculture Ministry under the World Bank, a project to empower small farmers to grow their own food, to boost production levels, and certainly for more activity within the fishing subsector. So how is government planning to consolidate these gains and generate even more activity within the agriculture sector, which can result in the creation of jobs and increased revenue? We continue to see work in construction, especially as relates to health, with the construction of at least 10 new health centers around the island. Some of them are ready to move in, and we should see that soon. And in housing, with apartment complexes continuing to shoot up in communities around Dominica. And according to the budget allocation, and I really want to point this out, on the capital expenditure, quite a chunk is put aside for housing and urban development in this budget, over $117 million. So we expect to see intense activity continuing in this area. And I just want to define that capital expenditure refers to undertaking new projects or continuing projects, monies for upgrades, new investments, and the like. So we are seeing quite a chunk allocated to housing and urban development, and also to the Ministry of Public Works and the Digital Economy, which is down to receive $71 million. Of course, Public Works is an expensive area of government, but the digital economy is new, and we've heard quite a bit of focus, not only from the Honorable Prime Minister, but the new Minister, Honorable Kasani Lavelle, who seems to be pretty enthusiastic about new innovations within that sector. So there's money for that under capital expenditure. Significantly also, we are seeing monies allocated for environment, rural modernization, and Kalinago upliftment. We've heard from the Honorable Minister, the parliamentary representative for the Salabia constituency, that there are plans for a reforestation project and the Kalinago Territory Climate Resilience Project, which will include the construction of a new hurricane shelter. And so we look to see what is contained in the budget along these lines for improvement in rural modernization and also in the Kalinago territory. There's $37 million for the Ministry of Blue and Green Economy, Agriculture, and National Food Security. What we were speaking about previously, the need to consolidate gains within the agriculture sector. So we look to see what new announcements will be made in this regard. Recurrent expenditure, which refers to payments on mostly fixed expenses on goods and services, wages, salaries, employer contributions, interest payments, and the like. We're seeing monies allocated to the Ministry of Finance in the amount of $154 million. Of course, this is not unusual. That ministry always gets the very highest allocation under recurrent expenditure. The Ministry of Education, Human Resource Planning, Vocational Training, and National Excellence is allocated $74 million. Most of us don't realize, but this is a pretty heavy ministry. It's one of the largest ministries within the government service when you factor in their 70 schools, including 15 secondary schools, when you factor in costs of maintenance and the like. The Ministry of Education does account for a significant chunk of the yearly budget. The Ministry of Health, Wellness, and New Health Investment will receive $59 million, and the National Security and Home Affairs Ministry, $53 million, and the Public Works and Digital Economy Ministry, $52 million under recurrent expenditure. So these are the most significant amounts going to the various ministries. So we are here to bring you all of this coverage during the morning. We are looking to hear from the Honorable Prime Minister. It is already 9:32, which means that very soon we should see people, fewer in numbers this year, filing into the Parliament building. As I mentioned earlier, we heard from Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt over the past week or so that he would announce a $30 million loan facility for small and medium-sized businesses. So we know there is a focus on stimulating activity within the private sector. That's why I thought it would be a good idea to bring in the president of the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, that is the DAIC, Mr. Kenny Green, to share some thoughts ahead of the budget presentation. Mr. Green, good morning and welcome to the budget. We have to share our mics. I hope you're okay with that.
Good morning, Ms. Dura. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I hope you're well.
I'm great. Thank you for having me here today on Budget Day. A different type of budget day, but a budget day nonetheless.
So we are being presented with the budget for the next financial year within the context of severe economic challenges. As the representative body of private sector organizations, what kind of measures are you anticipating? Do you hope for that would best benefit business activity in Dominica?
Yes. Well, there are two. You've made mention of one of them. I mean, we've had advocacy with the government since March because obviously what would have been a normal budget year has been, turned asunder by COVID. So typically for the budget year, we would have presented the white papers late February, early March for budget. But because of COVID, that attention was shifted towards the fiscal incentives that would have been put in place to try and support the economy. So in many ways, many of the things that have been advocated for the fiscal incentives, some of them would have spilled over into the budget. The primary thing that we've advocated for the budget is, of course, increased financing for SMEs and increased access to financing, and I can explain the difference. And then the second thing that we've advocated is for there to be an increase in local capital projects, because local capital projects, given that we're in a bubble, local capital projects being increased would mean increased revenue for contractors and the local economy and increased procurement from local suppliers of goods and services. And so we anticipate that these two measures will be primary goals for us to be able to trigger private sector growth.
You spoke about a difference between the provision of financing and access to that financing. Talk to us about that.
Yes, the government of Dominica has put in the past facilities at the aid bank for disbursement of funds. And in some cases, this has been a frustration for the private sector where they cannot access it because of previous NPLs and other encumbrances that...
What is an NPL?
An NPL is a non-performing loan. And other encumbrances. As we know, we live in a country where most of the security that's being offered is often land. And so that tends to become encumbered by previous facilities. So what we've been discussing with government is how to make it easier, to become more creative, to be able to allow not just new business people, but existing business owners to be able to retool and come back again. And we've been helping with that. I met with the IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, last week. And that was a very positive discussion because what they do is they buy the private sector debt from financial institutions. And so we discussed the possibility of them doing so for both the aid bank and for the credit unions, because both of these financial institutions are not regulated by the ECCB. So it means that the ECCB have a mechanism for banks regulated by them for buying non-performing debt. But for aid bank and for the credit unions, they don't fall under that umbrella. So we had that discussion with the IFC, and that's important because they can buy private sector debt and trim off the interest and then reschedule the debt with the private sector firms, whilst at the same time allowing them to re-engage discussions with facilities at aid bank and other providers.
Yeah, you speak about the need to generate creative ideas within the business sector. We've had several instances of government making available those loan facilities. But what are you telling your membership about the areas they should be looking at to generate that economic activity that we need? Creative ideas that actually stick, create jobs, and provide income.
Well, our economy is a consumption economy. We don't have much of a history of saving. Or people, you give us extra tax revenue, you give us extra dollars, you give us anything extra in our income, we spend. So we need to capture that consumption dollar. We've constantly advocated to government to give tax holidays where possible. But in terms of our membership and what they can do to get more creative, some of it is going to have to be a level of shared responsibility. So for example, if we look at the agriculture market, there's been greater demand because of the shortening of supply chains. So Martinique and Guadeloupe, for example, their supply chain, 90% of their commodities come from France. So there is a benefit to shortening the supply chain by getting supplies from Dominica. Yeah. And so allowing businesses who already exist to put in an export functionality, and I mean it could be some of the larger businesses who can turn their businesses not just into taking on added local production and reselling locally, but actually using it to derive an export business because they have the added financial capability. One of the gaps between the government and, for example, the hucksters is that when the agricultural providers provide goods to the packing sheds, they generally have to wait until the commodity is sold to get paid. Mm-hmm. The hucksters tend to pay up front, but they pay lower. Yeah. So, there's a gap in between there for new entrepreneurs to come along and say, you know what, I have a supermarket, I can take on 1,000 pounds of your product, but I can take 20,000 pounds and export the rest. And that, to me, there are avenues there. There's also new technology opportunities, in particular for facilitating remote delivery services, remote functionality, There's going to be added opportunities for providing extra value services. So, right now we can see that there is an opportunity for water once again. The exit of DBBL post Maria has created an opportunity, and there's a couple of ventures that are starting there. There's also a need for a marina facility, and there could be possibilities for joint venture. There are opportunities, but all of those opportunities require creativity, and they also require capital.
We've touched on some of this. I'm getting from what you're saying that there are inherent challenges that the private sector faces. But I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about the challenges faced by your membership operating within the Dominican economy and how we can begin to devise ways to bring solutions to these challenges that you face.
I think if we look at the hardest hit sector is the tourism sector. And so one of the things that exists for that tourism sector is some of these properties have gone down and have not come back up yet because they really don't have the capital to be able to start to be able to do the work. I think there's an opportunity for them to work very closely with the financial institutions because the facility that has been hinted, which we've advocated for, by the way, by the Prime Minister, is essentially as close to a grant as you can get, because it's 1% interest, and there is a moratorium on both the principal and the interest, which, given what the climate is like for a tourism provider, for example, if you can secure $500,000 to retool your hotel, given that the tourism season, the gap between now and the likely reopening, fully functional reopening of the tourism season is going to be about a year, then it gives you the capacity, taking the history of your occupancy and your income into the financial institution and saying, look, we were viable before this, we will be viable again, we want to retool, and we want to be able to come forward and work for a creative solution. And what are the creative solutions? A lot of people are tied up, as I said before, in security, but there's debentures, there is a life insurance, so there's also insurance on the accounts receivable that you can offer to the financial institutions. So there's a number of different ways. It's harder work. So from the front end, what the government is saying is great, but on the back end, that's where the work begins.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because I was going to ask what you thought specifically about the Prime Minister's $30 million loan facility, and we have seen similar initiatives in the past meant to pump money into the business sector. But we've also had concerns that these monies are not directed where they would result in the most economic benefit. How do you advise your members on how they can make the best use of this facility so it redounds to the ultimate benefit not only of the business but of the economy?
This is a tough reality that we have to face. I've said so in negotiations, and I've said in the public domain that not every business is supposed to succeed. That's a difficult thing to fathom, but that's a reality again. Around 80% of small businesses fail. Within our small context, obviously, we want everyone to succeed. And the first thing that really has to happen is for business owners and business people to separate themselves from their businesses where there's history of cash flow issues, where there's history of previous financial issues. Because you can have a very good business idea, you can have a very good business platform, but the history of the individuals involved can compromise the ability of the financial institution to believe in them. And it's one of the unfortunate byproducts of a very personalized society that people tend to find it very difficult to step back from the companies that they feel intertwined with. So it's like, if I can't get the money as the helm of this, then no one shall get it. And that's not feasible. So that's one of the first things we say is to partner more with other people who can actually present a stronger face for the feasibility of getting financing. And that is just practical and common sense.
Kenny, we have to wind down. I don't want you to move yet, but we are hearing some activity in the distance, which probably indicates that the Prime Minister may be arriving, which of course we would have a responsibility to announce. And we are seeing, I'm told, the arrival of the Honorable Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett, who is the Minister for Finance. He will present the national budget in the Parliament this morning. He is also the Minister for Economic Affairs, Investment, Planning, Sustainable Development, Telecommunications and Broadcasting. He is, of course, accompanied by his wife, Mrs. Melissa Scarrett, who is the parliamentary representative for the Roseau Central constituency. She is, of course, decked out in her smart suit. The Prime Minister looking very smart himself with his trademark briefcase, which we are to assume contains the content of the national budget. And they are making their way into the Parliament building, into the chamber. It is just 9:46. The activities here are expected to get underway soon. So we will soon see other parliamentarians filing in. So finally, Kenny, as you leave us outside of the strictest business enterprise focus, what are you looking to see in the national budget that you think will stimulate overall growth in the economy?
I think there has to be in some level of optimism projected towards people getting involved in new ventures. We again have built up so much of a culture of people looking for jobs that the whole issue of being jobless or unemployed is often seen as a position of weakness. I don't see it as that. It's actually a perceived strength given what has been going into financing agriculture. There's a lot of funds going into agriculture right now, and there's a lot of opportunity for young and older people to basically retool themselves, not just into agriculture. We've got money going into agriculture, we've got money going into the digital economy. People can retool themselves and take advantage of some of the opportunities to look at the supply chain shortening throughout the region that's going to give Dominicans an opportunity to supply services, not just in Dominica, but around the Caribbean.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny Green, the president of the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce. He tells me that his term of office will expire next month, so we should be hearing a new voice soon at the helm of the DIC. We thank him so much for his interventions here this morning. As we've told you, the Honorable Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett, who holds with him the national budget, has made his entry into the chamber while we await the arrival of other parliamentarians, and I'll begin to look here to see who is coming in so I can tell you about that as we proceed. As I mentioned earlier, we will have an over $900 million budget presented by the Honorable Prime Minister this morning. The proceedings will be officiated by the relatively still new Speaker of the House of Assembly, Honorable Joseph Isaac. His deputy is the young Philip Roll, and we are looking to see how Speaker Isaac will preside over his first budget debate. I am well aware that many of you are expecting fireworks, and in many cases you're looking forward to that. Yet we hope that the business of the House will be conducted in a sober manner with a focus on constructive debate. So as I mentioned earlier, the chamber, there will be social distancing guidelines observed, and so we are only expecting to see within the main chamber the parliamentarians, and several of them are already seated, including the Honorable Minister for Education, Human Resource Planning, Vocational Training and National Excellence, Mrs. Octavia Alfred. The Honorable Reginald Austri is at his place also. He is the Minister for Housing. We will see in the chamber government ministers, and upstairs we expect that the permanent secretaries in the various ministries will be seated. These are the only people who will be here this morning, in addition to the Speaker Emerita, that is Mrs. Alex Boyd Knights, and Ambassadors Emmanuel Nanton, I am told, as well as Ambassador Edward Lambert, Ambassador Francine Barron, Mr. Eisenhower Douglas, who is attached to the Ministry of Trade, and Mrs. Rosamond Edwards, who is the former Financial Secretary. She has been replaced by Ms. Dennis Edwards, the Financial Secretary, who will also sit in the main chamber of the House. We're looking at the Honorable Minister Greta Roberts. She is the Minister for let's get this, the Minister for Governance, Public Service Reform, Citizen Empowerment, Social Justice, and Ecclesiastical Affairs. She is the member for the Montjean Riviere Cyric constituency. The proceedings of the House are expected to get underway in just about 9 minutes, and as soon as that is ready, we will bring you over to that. In the meantime, we'll continue to monitor the entry of the various members of Parliament into the House. At this point, it is a good time to, as we look at the Honourable Minister for Public Works and the Digital Economy, Honourable Kasani Lavelle, wearing his mask, keeping in line with the restrictive measures imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The order paper, just a reminder, we will see the formal entry of the Honourable Joseph Isaac, the Speaker of the House of Assembly. We will have prayers, obituary, and congratulatory remarks, confirmation of the meetings of the Monday 10th and Tuesday 11th February, and that of Monday 6th April 2020. We are looking at the Honourable Minister Dr. Addis King, who is the Minister for Youth Development and Empowerment, Youth at Risk, Gender Affairs, Senior Security, and Dominicans with Disabilities. She is the member for the St. Joseph constituency. Following the confirmation of the minutes, here we have Honorable Dennis Charles, who is the Minister for Tourism and International Transport, as well as Maritime Initiatives. She is the member for the Soufrière constituency. In front of her, you can see the Attorney General, Honorable Levi Peter. Seated next to Ms. Charles is the Education Minister, who represents the Castlebruce constituency, Octavia Alfred, and in front of her, the Honorable Reginald Austria, the Minister for Housing. He, of course, is a long-standing member of the Dominica Parliament, and he represents the Cottage constituency. We will have announcements of the Speaker following the confirmation of the minutes, and following that, presentations of papers when Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett, the Minister for Finance, will present the draft estimates of revenue and expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021. We're looking at the Honourable Catherine Daniel, who is the parliamentary representative for the Collyho constituency. Following the presentation of papers, we'll have government notices, statement by ministers, and public business, under which is contained the main business of the House today. And we'll see motions from the Honourable Prime Minister and the Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs, Investment, Planning, Resilience, Sustainable Development, Telecommunications and Broadcasting, the Honourable Roosevelt Scarrett, who will table a motion for the approval of the estimates, following which he will present his budget address. The estimates in that case this year amounts to $942,179,940. We're looking at the Honourable Edward Regist, who is the Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, responsible for diaspora relations. He is the Member of Parliament for the Grand Bay constituency. Behind him is Senator Nicholas Esprit from Salisbury, who contested the general elections in 2019 in the Salisbury constituency. Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit will deliver his budget address, following which we will also see a motion for the authorization of an overdraft facility amounting to $61,500,000 Eastern Caribbean dollars from the First Caribbean International Bank, the National Bank of Dominica, the Royal Bank of Canada, and or any other approved financial institution to meet central government's current overdraft requirements. We will also see a motion from the Honorable Prime Minister and Finance Minister for a resolution to authorize the borrowing of a sum not exceeding the amount of 125 million Eastern Caribbean dollars from the National Bank of Dominica Limited on the following terms of a 4% interest rate over a repayment period of 20 years. So we're winding down. There's a pre-budget broadcast here on the Government Information Service as we get ready for the entry of the Speaker of the House of Assembly. And we've seen the steady filing in of members of the House. We are looking at the Honorable Shakira Lockhart Hippolyte, who is the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, International Transport and Maritime Initiatives. She is the Member of Parliament for the Roseau South constituency. We're also seeing there seated here is the Honorable Oscar George of Penville, who is the Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office with responsibility for telecommunications and broadcasting. Behind him is the Honorable Kent Edwards, who represents the La Plaine constituency. He is the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Health, Wellness and New Health Investments. We are seeing members of the opposition making their way into their seats, led by the opposition leader, Honorable Lennox Linton, who represents the Marigot constituency. We also saw the Honorable Danny Lugay, the Member of Parliament for the Roseau North constituency. Senator Francisca Joseph of La Plaine, she too has made her entry into the chamber, as well as, well, that's it for now. The others we expect will make their way in soon. So we look forward to the presentation of the budget here this morning. Seated very near Senator Francisca Joseph is Senator Ernie Lawrence John Finn from the community of Good Hope. She is another United Workers' Party senator in the Dominica Parliament, and they too will be expected to weigh in on the Prime Minister's budget probably sometime after Wednesday, when the opposition leader, we expect, will respond in full to the national budget. Usually he is given that one-day window to prepare his response. So we do expect to see him back here tomorrow morning to make his presentation, following which the debate from both sides of the House will ensue. We're seeing the arrival of the former Speaker of the House of Assembly, who has been named Speaker Emerita, which means she will be Speaker of the House and carry that title for as long as she is with us. That is Alex Boyd Knights, who has made her way into the chamber clearly in another capacity this time around. Dominica's longest serving House Speaker. Seated close to Boyd Knights is the Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador Steve Farrell. He too is seated in the main chamber of the House as we await the official start of proceedings here at the Dominica Parliament. It is Budget Day. I know it is a highly anticipated event. Every year it is so, but this year probably takes on even greater significance. We might have said the same thing following the passage of Hurricane Maria, because we were curious as to how the government would seek to resume activity in the national economy and lead us to recovery. We saw what happened then. And now we are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the budget takes on even a new complexion, more importance. And so we are very curious as to the measures contained in the national budget this year in light of the severe shocks to the national economy, significantly mainly in the area of tourism. And of course, this is not a Dominica situation alone. The tourism industry worldwide is on a virtual standstill. So how are we looking to extend our focus into other areas of the economy to stimulate activity, to provide jobs, to generate revenue for the country? So we're looking, I believe, to begin soon. It is 10 a.m. and all parliamentarians are seated, which means very soon we should see the arrival of the Honorable Speaker, Joseph Isaac. As soon as that happens, we will go over to the proceedings of the House. Honorable Kozia Frederick is also here. He is the Minister for the Environment. The House is about to get underway, and we go over for that.
Almighty God, who has in thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness, has appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of our society and the just government of man. We beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trusts in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Let thy blessing descend upon us here in this Parliament assembled, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation, in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those interests thou hast committed to our charge, all which we ask in the name and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that Standing Orders 7.1, 7.2, 28, 29, 30, and 32, which relate to the sitting of members, be suspended.
It has been moved and seconded that Standing Orders 7.1, 7.2, 28, 29, 30, and 32, which relates to the sitting of members, be suspended. Those in favor? Those against? I think the ayes have it.
Obituary and congratulatory remarks. Confirmation of minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the minutes of the meeting of Monday 10 and Tuesday 11 February and Monday 6 April 2020 be confirmed as circulated.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the minutes of the meeting of Monday 10th and Tuesday 11th February and Monday 6th April 2020 be confirmed as circulated. Those in favor? Those against? I think the ayes have it.
Announcements by Speaker.
Today, I just have two announcements, really. One relates to the issue of social distancing and protocol, and I'm announcing it to members of Parliament and also to the general public, so the general public can take a leaf from Parliament. We have maintained a protocol initiative as per the last Parliament we had, where we ensure that the social distancing as recommended by our health experts are maintained, and all members within the chamber and even upstairs, and I say shall wear mask. In regards to the debate today, the Honorable Prime Minister will be opening, but from tomorrow, and I don't want to anticipate, we will have a podium in which members who are in the second row above and other members will use the podium to deliver their speech. However, those in the first row will be able to deliver in their seat. So that's the first announcement. I just wanted to ensure that we remember the protocol in regards to the social distancing and also the sanitizing of hands when we are in and out of Parliament. Even at the doors, we have put in place sanitizing agent. Also, in regards to just a small note to inform Parliament, Senator the Honorable Clement Marsley has asked that he wear dark glasses because he has a little challenge with an eye problem. So I have given him permission to do so. I think that's it.
Sorry. Mr. Speaker, in respect to reading or delivering rather the budget address, would I be allowed to wear no mask?
Yes. Again, in regards to all the members who are sitting at the front in the lower area, you are allowed to remove your mask because there is no major risk in terms of the social distancing. And all the other members, that's why we put the podium in place, so members can remove their mask and deliver at the podium. Yes, Mr. Prime Minister.
Presentation of papers.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following paper on the table. Draft estimates and expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021.
Government notices.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that I shall be moving the motions standing my name and the bills standing my name on the other paper.
Statement by ministers. Public business, government business, motion.
estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending 30th June 2021. Be it resolved that this Honourable House approves the estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending 30th June 2020, amounting to $942,179,940, the details of which are contained in the draft estimates of the Commonwealth of Dominica for the year ending 30th June 2021. Mr. Speaker, members of Cabinet, members of this Honourable House, distinguished guests, my fellow Dominicans, residents, and friends of Dominica, greetings and good morning to you. Today, I give God the glory, for He has done great things for our country. He has stood steadfast with us, guiding and directing us through many challenges. Mr. Speaker, every few years, our country has been adversely impacted by exogenous shocks, which have led to life-altering changes. I reference in particular two major weather events in 2005 and 2017, which resulted in combined losses of more than 310% of GDP. And now, in 2020, the dreaded COVID-19 pandemic. But this government is not daunted by these crisis situations. As with God on our side, we are confident that we will overcome them. At the end of 2019, this country elected a new government. A strong mandate was given to the Dominican Labour Party and to me as your Prime Minister. Determined to build back better, we developed the nationally embraced vision of a new dynamic Dominica, coupled with our national resilience development strategy. I take this opportunity today, on this occasion of the first budget after elections, to again thank the citizens of this country for reposing confidence in this Dominican Labour Party administration. Today, I assure each and every one of you that we are humbled by this show of support, and I pledge my commitment to continue to serve and manage the affairs of this country with prudence and diligence to the benefit of all Dominicans. Mr. Speaker, when we woke up on January 1st to the new year 2020, it was with hope, excitement, and confidence that our collective and national fortunes were turning the corner. We had rebounded from Hurricane Maria and put in place new building blocks on which our future growth and development would rest. In January 2020, we gained more encouragement from the assessment and forecast of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, that the Dominican economy was set to expand by 5.5, 4.5, and 3.6% for the years 2020, 2021, and 2022, respectively. It must not escape our attention that the growth projection of 5.5% for Dominica was 2.1 percentage points higher than the economic growth rate which the IMF was also projecting for the countries in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. By any measure, Dominica was doing extremely well. At that time, our hopes were based on the solidness of our performance. But truly, Mr. Speaker, no one could have foreseen or predicted what lay ahead. A mere 2 months after the appointment of a new, young, and focused cabinet, we saw an unprecedented global shutdown. The world's busiest cities, highways, airports, thoroughfares, places of worship, learning, shopping, sports and entertainment activities stood empty and silent. Even as this Honourable House meets today, over 16 million people in the world have contracted the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, from which over 650,000 people have died. This government has had to divert significant resources to bolster the health sector and ensure an effective national response to the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center, Dominica has the third lowest incidence of the disease of 185 countries in the world, with only 18 cases and no deaths. Prior to COVID-19, the IMF reported that global growth had been 2.9% in 2019 and was expected to be 2.3% in 2020. By June of this year, however, when presenting a global economic update in the World Economic Outlook, WEO, the IMF described the COVID-19 pandemic and its impacts as a crisis like no other. Mr. Speaker, according to the WEO, the baseline forecast envisions a 5.2% contraction in global GDP in 2020. Growth in the group of emerging market and developing economies is forecast at -3% in 2020. Growth among low-income developing countries is projected at -1% in 2020. The IMF reports that for the first time, all regions are projected to experience negative growth in 2020. The small island developing states of the Caribbean are standing on the precipice of the greatest risk to our economies and societies in modern history, with an expected contraction of 8%. This, Mr. Speaker, is a disturbing forecast. Mr. Speaker, this is the broad background in which the annual budgetary exercise for the government and people of Dominica now takes place. I am pleased to report to you that this government, which I have had the honor to lead, has kept Dominica and Dominicans safe. I also wish to thank my fellow Dominicans for their maturity, sacrifice, and discipline, and for, in large measure, complying with the guidelines and advisories of the Ministry of Health. In our national and collective objectives, this government will not turn back. This Prime Minister will keep pressing forward. This country will not fail. Dominicans will survive. Dominicans will succeed. Mr. Speaker, this budget poses, and through its proposals, answers the question, and I quote, "In a time of trial, what must we do to achieve our transformation into dynamic Dominica, where there is prosperity for all?" This is the overarching goal of which we must not resile or be deflected. The new challenges emerging out of COVID-19 pandemic have made our policy outlines clearer and have strengthened our resolve to further invest in the empowerment of our people. If nothing else, the current economic uncertainties have highlighted the need to further strengthen our fiscal discipline and increase efficiency in government operations. In continuing to spend significantly on areas such as education and health, and in building an economy that is adaptable to a digital environment, we are indeed investing in the very dignity of our people. With that in mind, the theme for this year's budget is the road to dynamic Dominica, fostering economic resilience. Mr. Speaker, the full report on our accomplishments for the previous fiscal year is contained in the printed text. I therefore now turn to this year's economic review. Macroeconomic performance and outlook. The arrival of COVID-19 disease to our shores on March 22, 2020, and our subsequent efforts to contain its spread led to a virtual shutdown of the economy, of the country. Like countries the world over, our ports were closed to passenger travel, as were those of sister Caribbean nations, bringing tourism activity to a halt. The wholesale and retail sector was affected by the temporary closure of most businesses. The same was true for the banking and insurance sector. Although construction activity did not cease altogether, the need for physical distancing and the observation of strict protocols took its toll on the level of allowable activity. This was evidenced by a public sector investment program outturn of $158.6 million for fiscal year 2019-2020, compared to $389.4 million for the previous fiscal year. As a consequence of the foregoing, Mr. Speaker, there was a sudden and unexpected economic slowdown with a resultant weakening of government's fiscal performance. The January 2020 IMF growth focus of 5.5% for Dominica this year has since been revised to a contraction of roughly 5.8%. At the beginning of that last fiscal year, that is July 2019, we had forecasted an overall deficit of 6% and a primary deficit of 4% of GDP by June 2020. However, due to strong tax revenue performance, along with close management of expenditure during the first 6 months of that fiscal year, the IMF in January 2020 projected that the overall deficit would fall to 1.2% of GDP, and there would be a small primary surplus of 0.6% of GDP by the end of June 2020. The broad fiscal target is a surplus of 2.4% of GDP. By contrast, Mr. Speaker, preliminary data now shows an overall deficit of 10.2% of GDP and a primary deficit of 7.8% of GDP for fiscal year 2019-2020. This fiscal outcome is primarily as a result of COVID-19 induced revenue shortfall of some 33.6% and a sharp increase in unplanned expenditure associated with the containment of the virus. Notwithstanding what has transpired over the last 6 months, this government is still optimistic of a recovery of the economy. Barring further disasters, the outlook suggests a 3.5% expansion in economic activity in 2021 as the impact of the pandemic dissipates and the economy returns to normal. Growth is expected to average 2.3% over the medium term. Mr. Speaker, at the end of fiscal year June 30, 2020, the government's external debt stood at $683.3 million, of which $599.8 million is central government debt, and $83.7 million is debt guaranteed for public corporations. Domestic debt for the same period amounted to $550.4 million, of which $481 million is held by central government and $69.2 million is guaranteed by central government for public corporations. During the fiscal year 2019-2020, a sum of $52.8 million was borrowed from external sources to manage the spread of COVID-19 disease and mitigate against its adverse impact on the economy. An amount of $37.9 million came from the IMF under the Rapid Credit Facility, $6.7 million from the Caribbean Development Bank, and $8.2 million was borrowed from the World Bank's International Development Association as part of the OECS Regional Health Project. The resolutions to authorize these facilities will be presented at the next sitting of Parliament. On the domestic side, government converted a portion of its overdraft balance and non-performing loans of the Public Works Corporation to a 20-year loan in the sum of $125 million. The total debt to GDP as of June 30, 2020, is estimated at 79.4%. We've got central government debt to GDP at 69.6%. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fiscal gap, we have not defaulted on our debt service obligations. We continue to make all debt payments on time and in time, Mr. Speaker. It is imperative that government continues to maintain its good track record in servicing its debt, and every effort will be made to meet debt commitments as they become due and payable. Building financial resilience. Mr. Speaker, the management of government's finances has not been easy amidst continual climatic and global economic shocks. Financing gaps have to date been managed at sustainable debt levels and without imposing any additional tax burden on the people of Dominica. The salaries of public officers have not been affected. No one was sent home or no one has been sent home. And we serviced our debt, as I said, on time, Mr. Speaker. In order to maintain this position and ensure that these shocks do not result in derailing the country's fiscal position, government has decided to implement a number of additional policies to enhance public finance management and maintain sustainable debt levels to ensure financial resilience. A disaster resilience strategy, DRS, was recently developed with technical assistance from the IMF. It is government's intention to include that strategy as an annex to the Climate Resilience and Recovery Plan, which was published in May 2020. That plan is built on 3 pillars. Pillar 1, structural resilience. Pillar 2, financial resilience. Pillar 3, post-disaster resilience. Mr. Speaker, to achieve financial resilience, more robust and up-to-date public finance management legislation is required. With the support of the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, CARTAC, a new public finance management bill has been drafted and is being reviewed. Government has also decided to implement a number of fiscal rules which will set the parameters within which it operates in areas such as debt, primary balance, and expenditure. Special provisions will be made for disasters and unforeseen events. Mr. Speaker, these rules are being finalized, and it is government's intention to seek feedback from the public before taking them to Parliament for approval, hopefully by September 2020. As a prudent government which prides itself on transparency, this government in 2013 presented to the Parliament a medium-term debt management strategy for fiscal year 2013-2014 to fiscal year 2017 to 2018. That strategy also included a review of the debt portfolio, which provided an in-depth analysis of the stock and composition of the debt, as well as the risk levels. The medium-term strategy for fiscal year 2019-2020 to 2021-2022, which also includes a debt portfolio review, is being finalized and will be presented to Parliament by September 2020. Although the medium-term strategy is for a period of 3 years, government will table a debt portfolio review report in Parliament annually. Mr. Speaker, also by September 2020, government will present to Parliament a new procurement bill. The bill seeks to modernize public procurement, underpinned by principles of integrity, accountability, transparency, and attaining the best value for money. Once enacted, it will replace the Public Procurement and Contract Administration Act No. 11 of 2012. The draft bill will be published by the second week in August to allow government to incorporate feedback from the general public before presentation to Parliament. The new bill was drafted with the assistance of the European Union and the World Bank and has received positive feedback from stakeholders and our development partners. Mr. Speaker, financial resilience cannot be viewed solely from the government's perspective. Every resident must play his or her part in ensuring their own financial resilience. Tropical Storm Erica and Hurricane Maria demonstrated how easily and quickly what we took several years to build could be lost within hours. Prior to Hurricane Maria, many were of the view that insurance was not required. Some thought they could rebuild from their pockets if anything were to happen. The experience of Maria has taught us that adequate insurance coverage is essential to safeguard our investments, our future, and that of our families. Government therefore urges all residents to adequately insure their properties and businesses against all insurable risks. Mr. Speaker, government, with assistance from our partners, the European Union and the Government of Canada, continue to pay insurance premiums annually to the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. That insurance policy provides much-needed cash flow following natural disasters such as tropical cyclones, earthquakes, and excess rainfalls. We have also set up a Vulnerability, Risk, and Resilience Fund at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to cover emergency expenditure following disasters. Effective October 2020, an amount of $500,000 will be placed in that fund monthly from CBI revenue and other sources, including contributions from our development partners. Meanwhile, government is exploring the development of a platform for the use of blockchain-based parametric insurance as a resilience option for households, small businesses, and farmers. It will be a micro-insurance product and will be designed so that premiums are highly affordable by the more vulnerable in our society. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fiscal gap during the financial year 2019-2020, this administration's prudent management of the national economy in the interests of all Dominicans continues. In protecting the fiscal position